Our story begins in Tassie in the 1990s. It travels all the way to Brunei and it ends up here in Adelaide at Torrens. A conversation happens that many of us will have with a family member, a friend, or a close loved one. Would you please welcome the sensational Debbie Smith.
Well, I am an Adelaide girl, but in 1993 I was living in Hobart. I'm going to set the scene because some people here probably weren't even born in 1993. So I'm going to channel the Logies because they've just happened. So the most wonderful show on TV was Hey Hey It's Saturday. I'm not sure what that says about Australia. And in February of 1993, someone drove a truck loaded full of explosives to the basement of the World Trade Center, which was something that we knew, there was a hint of what was to come, I guess. And my February in 1993 was a sobering as well. I received a call from my mother, so Gloria was in Adelaide, and she rang and said, well, dear, it was on a Thursday, she said, well, dear, I had a mammogram earlier this week and I had breast cancer. But I'll be fine. You don't need to come home. It's all going to be good. And I thought, not so much about the diagnosis. I registered that, but I thought how hard it must have been for a mum to tell a child that so far away. And I thought about that and thought what a hard thing it was to do. And of course I went home and I spent time with Mum and Dad. Mum came out of hospital. She seemed fine. I went back to Hobart, and my sisters, Lynn and Pam, would occasionally say, well, I don't know that Mum dealt very well with her cancer. She never talked about it. She doesn't seem to have grieved about it. And I didn't know, because in 1993 there was no WhatsApp, no Skype. I couldn't see Mum's face when I talked to her on the phone, but she sounded fine. And life kind of went on, and that's what she said was going to happen. So then I want to jump forward to 2003, 10 years later. Now we're watching Rove, and the most exciting thing for me that happened that year perhaps was that the Human Genome Project was wrapped up, because that to me is a flag of a sense of promise. So that year had some promise. It had some difficulty before that though, because I found myself making that call to my daughter. So I had to call my daughter, who was much younger than I was when I received that call, to say, I found a lump, I've got breast cancer. It was a Thursday as well, and I said, I'm having surgery on Saturday. There's no need to come, I'll be fine. I spoke to my sisters and my mum said, it'll be okay, girl, just get on with it, I've done that. This was my mother's way to be matter of fact, I guess. So I had my surgery. And I woke up the next day and I was still there, and so life was going on. And a colleague came and delivered 100 exam papers for me from the exams the day before. Not quite the get well present that you normally want. But they were tied up in the exam strings we used, and they were pink, so that was kind of nice. Now, this was a moment for me that was quite defining, because it gave me the sense that things in your life can happen at the most unexpected times and in the most unexpected places. Because I'd made those calls and had that surgery not in Adelaide and not in Hobart and not even in Australia, but 5,000 kilometres away, where I was living in Brunei, Dar es Salaam. So I had this surgery in a place that people at home were saying was a developing country, and what was I doing? But Peter, my husband, who's over there, and I had made the decision that this was right for us, and it was right for us. And I continued to get better, and I only got 2 weeks leave there because that's what you get. I went back to work. That Christmas I popped home to show my family that I was still around, and my mother said, life goes on. That's how it is. And I came back. I'm ready to start a new academic year. Now, in Brunei, higher duties are not something that you apply for. You're given them. The Vice-Chancellor gives them to you, in fact. So, and you're not allowed to say no. But I had... I'm not suggesting that we should adopt that, by the way.
I really like that one. doesn't happen around here.
So I had been the coordinator of special education programs at the university for the last 3 years, and I spoke to my dean and asked him if I could be relieved of that duty while I recovered from my surgery. It was the only time I think I've kind of drawn on that to get a favour, and there were other reasons why I didn't want to do that job. But my dean, Haji Junaidi, said, well, can you do another job? And I said, of course I can do another job, because I thought, what other job can they give me with higher duties? There aren't any. So I thought that'd be fine. And about a week or so later, I went down to my pigeonhole, which is where you get your mail, and there was a letter from the Vice-Chancellor, and I thought, how nice. Dato was writing to say to me, thank you for a job well done. And he was. But he was also saying, congratulations, because now you're the head of teaching practice. Okay, I wasn't expecting that, because the head of teaching practice was an overload. Of course, it was one of these higher duties. I taught about 20 hours a week, and now I was going to put 1,500 students in school that year, across all of our programs, our English-speaking programs and our Malay medium and Arabic medium programs. Now, my English is not bad. My Malay, not so good, even though Peter and I lived there for a long time, our Malay is not great. And my Arabic is non-existent at all. So, there we were. So, I had this letter in my hand. There'd never been a non-local, non-Malay speaking head of teaching practice before. So I did what you do with things like that. I folded the letter up and I put it back in the envelope and I put it back in my pigeonhole. And I went back upstairs and continued on with what I was doing. A bit later in the day, I crept back down there and had a look, and it was still in my pigeonhole. So I went home and I did tell Peter, and I can't even remember what we talked about it, but I said it was still in my pigeonhole. And the next day I went back and it was still there. And I could see it was not moving on by itself. It was going to stay there. So I took it out of the pigeonhole. And I thought about that, and that reminded me of my mum, who had said, life goes on. You just get on with these things. So I just got on with it. And I found some great colleagues who were willing to volunteer some time, because there was no extra money and no staff. I had someone who would send letters for me, but that was it. And I found friends who would translate into Malay or Arabic for me. And when I had to stand up and do all of those talks to everyone, they filled in on the bits that I couldn't do. And we turned that around because I worked with great people. Working with great people makes a huge difference. Great people who saw promise. And I did that job for a couple of years, and I think I left it in good shape. Not because I'd done anything special, but I'd worked with special people, and together we'd done something great. So, I haven't finished. There's more. Sorry, there's a little bit more, because I haven't got to Torrens yet. So, I came home to Australia, and I did many different things. Lived in lots of different places. This is the opportunity that Mama kept talking about. And there's stuff for other stories, because I can't fit them in tonight. But I eventually came back to Adelaide because my daughter was having a baby, and she said, I don't want to do this long distance, Mummy, I need to be here. So we came home to be grandparents, and that's been an amazing journey. And I did lots of things in Adelaide too. I did all sorts of interesting things. One of them was working at the university where I taught fabulous students like Resh. But I taught students in classes of 100 to 450, and I never, only exceptional students do you get a chance to connect to there. And so I was looking around, and in 2017, now on TV we're watching a range of useless, mindless reality shows. But by the end of that year we would celebrate same-sex marriage. So it was a year of celebration that we need to remember. I saw the advertisements that everyone else who's spoken tonight, James saw that. We all saw those small advertisements. There was one to be a casual lecturer at Torrens. And I came along and I started here, and wow, what a difference that was. I'd spent, nearly 40 years teaching in universities here and there and all over the place, and never had I had a chance to work in small classes with that engagement that Resh was talking about, with students from all over the place. I'd worked with international students before, but here were students who came with excitement and it was a wonderful thing. And one day I was offered the most fantastic, it is, in all my teaching career, the most exciting thing I've ever done. Mustafa gave me one of those live briefs that he talked about. And this was a live brief to help a local cemetery here in Adelaide try and work out how to memorialise homeless people. And it was a really valuable project. I offered it to my students with the option that they didn't have to take it up. We took it in a regular class, but it was going to be extra work. And every single one of them said yes, they wanted to do that. So we worked on this every week. And we found out what happens around the world and what happens in Australia when homeless people die. And we made a visit to the cemetery. Mustafa and I are quite excited about that. Now I understand that because he likes creepy things. But there you go. So all the students said yes, and they all came. Now, they were all international students, and I had no idea how much I'd pushed them that trimester because every single one of them had cultural issues around death, and particularly around cemeteries, where they see as perhaps being quite terrifying places. But we went off on that tour and they saw that this is a cemetery where you do yoga on the lawn and you go and listen to concerts and you sit in quiet contemplative places. And it changed them. And they all took photos and they all sent them home to say, death doesn't have to be like that. And they did such amazing work and they all stepped up and they presented to the board at the end, and it was amazing, Mustafa, wasn't it? It was fabulous. They chose who would present, and they chose from different countries to represent different things, and they told the board about what they saw for how they could memorialise the homeless. But they didn't just talk about that. They talked about celebrating life as well. And they also talked about how far they'd come. They shared that, and it was fabulous. It was the most amazing thing that we could have done. They grew so much in that process, and I grew so much in that process, and everyone who was touched by it, I think, did as well. And it made me think again of what my mum had said about, you could just give up on life, or you could just take every opportunity that there is and you could enjoy all that it brings. And so my mum was right. Life is good. So to Mum, thank you.